30 days ago, I made a decision my son thought was reckless. I told him I was going to cook nothing but the recipes that the FDA and health authorities had spent decades trying to ban. The recipes Italian grandmothers across America were fined for making. The ones inspectors called a public health menace. The ones that had been pushed out of commercial kitchens and nearly eliminated from domestic ones too. No frozen dinners, no supermarket shortcuts, nothing pasteurized, standardized, or government approved. Just the food that Rosa Caruso was making when the health inspector knocked on her door in Manhattan in 1923. He said, "Dad, you are 74 years old. What if something goes wrong?" I said, "Mrs. DeLuca, 3 doors down, ate like this her entire life and reached 87 in full possession of her mind and her appetite. I think the odds are in my favor." My name is Harold, and what happened over those 30 days changed the way I think about food, about authority, and about what was taken from American kitchens without anyone being asked. Subscribe before we start. This is what I found out. Day 1. Sunday gravy with pork neck bones. I started with the most iconic and the most surveilled, the gravy. Pork neck bones browned in cast iron at 6 in the morning, crushed San Marzano tomatoes, the lowest possible flame, nothing else, no shortcuts, no bouillon cubes, just what Italian grandmothers used. At 7 in the evening, after 13 hours on the stove, I tasted the sauce. I sat down at the kitchen table and did not move for 20 minutes. Not because I was tired, because I had forgotten that food could taste like this. The collagen from the bones had dissolved into gelatin, the marrow had enriched the sauce. The tomato acid had softened through 13 hours of heat into something smooth and complex that no jar of tomato sauce and no instant pot would ever reproduce. Cost under $5. Neck bones, tomatoes, olive oil. 13 hours of low heat. Health inspectors had cited Italian grandmothers for leaving gravy on the stove all day because they considered it a contamination risk. That gravy had not contaminated anyone in 500 years of continuous preparation. It had only fed generations of people with something extraordinary. Day 3. Lardo on toast. I found an Italian specialty shop in Indianapolis that still carried it. Cured fatback, pure pork fat aged with rosemary, garlic, and black pepper, sliced paper thin over warm bread. It melted on the tongue into something so silky it seemed impossible it had come from a cheap cut. By the 1950s, regulations on cured pork fat had pushed lardo out of most Italian-American delis. The tradition went underground, made in apartments and basements, consumed at family tables where no inspector would ever knock. In 2003, the FDA attempted to block the importation of authentic Italian lardo on food safety grounds. The outcry from food historians reversed the decision within months. The same product Italian grandmothers had made in coffee tins in the Bronx was declared artisanal, imported at $30 a pound to Manhattan restaurants, served on charcuterie boards. The women who had been making it for decades received no apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. My son came over on day 3. I put the lardo on toast in front of him without explaining what it was. He ate it quietly. Then he said, "What is this?" I said, "Cured pork fat, effectively illegal in commercial kitchens." He had another piece. Day 5. Braciole stuffed with hard-boiled egg. This was the dish that separated Sunday from every other day of the week in Italian-American households from South Philadelphia to San Francisco. Thin slices of beef pounded flat, layered with breadcrumbs, garlic, parsley, pine nuts, raisins, and whole hard-boiled eggs, then rolled tight, tied with kitchen twine, and braised for hours in the Sunday gravy already going since morning. 4 hours later, I cut the first braciole at the table. That cross-section, rings of white and yolk surrounded by dark, seasoned beef, was exactly as I had read about it, something completely unlike anything I had ever made in my own kitchen. Health officials in the 1940s were suspicious of eggs held inside cooked meat for extended periods. These women knew that what they were doing was not dangerous. It was applied chemistry, practiced long before chemistry had a name. Here is the first thing I discovered at the 10-day mark. I had not been sick, not once. Not a single digestive problem, not a single symptom of any kind. I had eaten lardo, raw egg zabaione, fresh ricotta from raw milk, salt-cured raw anchovies, home-cured salami, and I felt completely fine. I felt better than I normally do, if I am being straightforward about it. This is not a coincidence. The traditional Mediterranean diet, the real one, not the version sold in nutrition books, was built on exactly these ingredients. Quality animal fats, fermented preparations, long-cooked proteins, nothing processed beyond recognition. Before someone decided that a regulatory agency knew better than 500 years of accumulated practice. Day 12. The banned Sunday dessert, zabaione. In 1934, the New York City Board of Health issued a specific advisory against uncooked egg preparations, naming zabaione explicitly as a salmonella risk. Italian grandmothers across New York and New Jersey read that advisory and made zabaione for Sunday dessert anyway. On day 12, I whisked 6 egg yolks with sugar and Marsala wine over a double boiler for 20 minutes. The bowl filled with a thick, warm foam, fragrant with wine and egg. I served it in ceramic cups with some strawberries. My son, who had been watching this experiment with growing skepticism, had a cup. He tasted it. He was quiet. Then he said, "Why has nobody ever made this for me before?" I said, "Because someone in 1934 decided it was dangerous." The zabaione continued for another 60 years without a single recorded consequence. Day 15. Raw milk ricotta. This is technically the most controversial item on the list. Ricotta, made with unpasteurized whole milk, violates FDA guidelines in most states. I found a small farm outside Indianapolis that sold raw milk at the farm gate. I heated it to 180 degrees, added white wine vinegar, watched the curds form, drained them through cheesecloth. 90 minutes from start to finish. The ricotta was still warm when I put it on the plate. White, slightly grainy, tasting of pure cream and nothing else. That white substance in plastic tubs at the grocery store bears no relationship to this. They are two entirely different products sharing a name. I understood on day 15 why Italian grandmothers never bought ricotta from a store. They knew what ricotta actually was. They could not pretend the substitute was the same thing. Here is the second thing I discovered at the 17th day. I was spending less, nearly $25 a week less, despite buying higher quality ingredients for every single item. The difference was zero waste. The gravy used butcher scraps. The braciole used cheap cuts. The ricotta whey went into cooking vegetables. The stale bread became breadcrumbs. The bones from the braised meat became stock for the week. My mother worked the same way in Indiana. Bacon drippings saved in a jar. Every scrap turned into something. Stock made from whatever was left. I had spent 30 years unlearning everything she had taught me. 30 days of cooking the way Italian grandmothers cooked was relearning all of it. Day 20. Home-cured salami. I had been preparing this since day 1. Salami requires months to cure. But on day 20, I cut into a salami I had made 6 months earlier. Pork mince with back fat, salt, black pepper, red wine, garlic, and fennel seeds. Packed into natural casing, hung in a cool corner of the garage. It was perfect, dense, aromatic, the fat evenly distributed throughout. The FDA's home curing regulations are extensive, largely unenforceable, and largely ignored in Italian-American households where the knowledge has survived. The salami hanging in my garage was not dangerous. It was applied microbiology refined across 500 years. Here is the third thing I discovered at the 25th day. I went through my medicine cabinet. Antacids in the past month, none. Digestive tablets, none. Anti-bloating supplements, none. Various other things I normally kept stocked, none of them touched. I cannot make a scientific claim. I can tell you this had not happened in years. Day 27. Pane e olio. Thick bread toasted over a gas burner. A cut clove of raw garlic rubbed over the hot surface until the clove wore down to nothing. Olive oil poured generously. Coarse salt scattered over. I had this for breakfast on day 27, the way Italian grandmothers ate it every morning of their adult lives. My son came over that morning. He found me standing at the counter eating bread. He said, "That's breakfast?" I said, "Italian grandmothers ate this every morning. Some of them lived past 90. He took a piece, ate it at the counter. He said, "How have I never eaten this before?" The honest answer was, because I never taught you, because I stopped doing what my mother did without ever asking myself why I was stopping. Day 30. What I learned. On day 30, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to understand what the previous month had actually meant. I had not gotten sick. I was physically better than when I started. I had spent less, despite buying better quality food. I had wasted almost nothing, and I had eaten some of the finest food I had tasted since I was a child, sitting at the De Luca table 3 doors down. The health authorities, who had spent decades trying to eliminate these traditions, were not wrong because they were corrupt. They were wrong because they trusted industrial food science over accumulated human knowledge. They believed that standardization and pasteurization and regulation were improvements on 500 years of empirical practice. They were not improvements, they were substitutions, and we have spent 3 generations eating the substitutes and calling it progress. My mother saved bacon drippings. She made stock from chicken carcasses. She used every scrap. She knew that Sunday required something you had been tending since morning. These were not old-fashioned habits. They were correct. I understood that on day 30 in a way I had not understood before. At the end of day 30 my son called. He said, "Dad, will you teach me how to make the Sunday gravy?" I said I would. We start this Sunday at 6 in the morning. That is the only ending this story was ever going to have. Subscribe. I will be here next week. There is always more to uncover. One more thing before I finish. About what I did not expect at the end of the experiment. My son came to dinner on day 28. He brought his daughter, my granddaughter, who is 15, and who I have rarely seen eat anything that did not come in a wrapper or a delivery bag. He brought her to taste the gravy, to watch me cut the braciole, to see what pane e olio looked like when it was made right. She did not say much. She ate a great deal. At the end of the evening she asked me, "Grandpa, will you teach me how to make this?" That is the question I never asked Mrs. De Luca, the one I was always too busy to ask, the one I assumed there would always be time for later. There was not always time. She died in 1992. I never learned how she made her salami. I never learned her braciole exactly. I watched her make them dozens of times and never thought to ask. Do not make the same mistake. Go to that kitchen. Ask that question. Before there is no one left to answer it. That knowledge does not write itself down. It lives in the hands. And when the hands are gone, it is gone with them. Subscribe. I will be here next week. There is a great deal more to uncover. Something else I need to tell you about the medicine cabinet. On day 25 I went through the bathroom cabinet and counted what I had taken in the previous month. Antacids, none. Digestive supplements, none. The various remedies I normally kept stocked, none of them touched. I cannot make a scientific claim about causation. I can tell you that this had not happened in years, and I can tell you that the traditional Mediterranean diet these women were living was built on exactly the principles that nutritionists are now quietly rediscovering after 3 generations of processed food. The authorities who tried to eliminate these traditions were not protecting public health. They were protecting an industry. The same industry that gave us margarine, processed cheese, and corn syrup as improvements on what Italian grandmothers were making in their apartments for pennies. My mother knew better. Bacon drippings in a jar, stock from the carcass, nothing thrown away. She had never heard the words Mediterranean diet. She was just cooking correctly. That is what I am trying to get back to, one Sunday at a time.